Guys, tonight on the Hawk Zone, we got a special guest coming on the show, Brian Nemhauser from the Hawkblogger. He's coming on fresh out of mini camp. Brian was down there, so you're going to get a first-hand take of what's going on down there. Maybe players that you haven't even heard of that are stepping up or wowing some people. But we're going to get into all that with Brian. We're going to talk about the quarterback room. We're going to talk about position battles. O-line we're going to look at, who's stepping up there. How does he think it looks? So tons of stuff coming up on the other side with Brian Nemhauser. But guys, before that, if you haven't done it yet, make sure you go down, subscribe to our channel, like the videos, share the videos. All that stuff helps out the channel. You can also go down and you can buy us a coffee. Links are in the description. So guys, on the other side, Brian Nemhauser.
So y'all can sit here and ask me all the questions y'all want to.
Don't you ever talk about me.
Let's go. It's go time, baby.
I'm just about that action, boss.
You ready to go get it. You just like to do it.
That's what it is.
Defense trying to do that. Pass is caught back in. Can't chase it. What a catch! Jackson Smith and Are you kidding me? Baldwin. Oh my goodness, he caught it.
This is the HawksZone Rundown with your hosts Ryan and Bryce.
Brian Nemhauser from the Hawkblogger joins us on the show today. We're excited to have Brian on the show, fresh from mini camp. Brian, we're excited to have you on, man. Mini camp is here, and there's a lot of rumblings. The biggest thing is this whole buy-in thing. Everybody's excited about that. Seems like a new era has arrived. But what were your biggest takeaways as a whole out of mini camp?
Well, it's good to be here. Nice to see you guys. Biggest takeaways for me were, I think the offense has a ways to go. I think, especially there'll be a lot of conversation about Sam Darnold, and while I don't think Sam Darnold had, a standout OTA or mini camp, I think that for me, I was more struck by the receiver room and the fact that it just looks a little bit limited. It doesn't look that dynamic, and after having seen many years with, DK Metcalf in that room, or, before that, obviously have had some pretty good receivers in there that cause problems for the defense. I think that that's going to be a little bit of an issue for this team. I hope that's not the case, but that was kind of my observation. The other aspect of that, though, is this team feels much more connected and cohesive than it did a year ago. And that's not just the players, it's the coaches, it's the coaches and players together. The whole thing feels like, to some extent, Mike Macdonald's first year, even though it technically is his second.
So with that being said, Brian, and minicamp, obviously one big topic that everyone's been talking about is Gray Zabel being, the first pick this year in the first round, and this offensive line. And it's been an ongoing discussion for almost feels like 10 plus years now at this rate. But who are some of the guys that maybe surprised you the most? I know they can't do a lot of hitting and stuff, but in the drills you shot John Benton do, who are the guys that kind of stood out to you?
Probably not the guy that you might expect. I mean, I was someone who was pretty excited when the Seahawks called the name Anthony Bradford a few years ago. Really impressive athletes, had played some tackle, even left tackle. The chances of him moving to guard and being a powerful player there seemed promising. He's been really bad the last couple of years. And not only has he been bad, but he's been, I think, not in top shape physically. He looks like a new guy this year, and it's before pads go on. There's a lot of other things to go on through, but Mike Macdonald confirmed that his body composition has changed. They've been measuring that stuff all the time, and that he's on the right track. And when he goes through these drills, there's just a little bit of a different sound when he's striking people than other guys. And while Christian Haynes seems to be getting a little bit of the nod as the starter at right guard, I think that they internally, I don't think they'd be shocked at all if Anthony Bradford ends up forcing his way into that spot, which would be a pretty big surprise. It would definitely be a surprise to me. We'll see there. The other guy I'd call out is Abe Lucas. I think he looks great. And he's another guy that when he makes contact, people move. And I don't have to remind Seahawks fans of the revolving door that they've had at right tackle. And I think people are really overlooking just how challenging that has been for the Seahawks the past few years. They were giving up the most pressure from the right tackle spot of any team in the NFL back in 2023. And over the first part of 2024, that happened as well. So a healthy Abe Lucas could be all by himself a huge floor raiser for this offensive line.
Yeah, that's been a concern for a while, the health of Abe. And and last year it was great to see him finish the year healthy, and all off season he's saying, hey, I'm healthy. This isn't a chronic thing. So that, great to hear for Seahawks fans. What about the other position there on that O-line, the center spot? It feels like, both guys have been getting similar reps with Olu and Jalen Sandell. We saw Sandell get a bit of a cup of coffee last year and looked impressive, downfield, and just kind of an athletic center. And so what is your take there, watching that position unfold? Do you think there's a one guy has a nod over the other, or how do you think that's going to play out?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think Jalen Sandell's also taken some snaps at guard during OTAs and minicamp, and Christian Haynes has taken some snaps at center. So it's been an interesting position to watch. And in fact, we saw a little bit more of Christian Haynes at center toward the end. And I don't know if that was just a continuation of exploring different players at different positions, or if they were starting to get more interested in that as a potential outcome going into the season. So we'll find out, obviously, when they get back for training camp, but that's one to watch. I think Olu Oluwatimi looks like he looks like the starter from the team's perspective. Jalen Sandell certainly is getting his opportunities, but generally speaking, I think Olu is the guy that I expect to come out on top there. And he had some impressive moments. There was one play, I don't know if it was minicamp or OTA, but they were doing a drill. It's a pass blocking drill where the oncoming defender is really just another offensive lineman carrying a pad, and they're striking kind of high, like kind of shoulder level. And Federico Merenges, the undrafted free agent center that they've got, came in, and Olu flatbacked him, like knocked him on his tail, and like nobody else did anything close to that during this drill. And John Benton was very excited. I think he said something like, "Man, we got a kill." So that was good to see, because I think power is one of the things you want to see develop for Olu, and he definitely showed it, at least on that one rep.
So speaking of the last person on this offensive line, Brian, obviously Gray Zabel was our first round pick. How has he looked fitting in? Because it sounds like from, your reporting and everyone else's that he's kind of been penciled in so far as that left guard. How has he looked in minicamp so far, in rookie minicamp even?
Yeah, I think with Gray, I think it's no news is good news kind of thing. There isn't something I can say where he's stood out in one way or another. I happen to have seen him down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, and practices there with pads on, going against pretty much every pass rusher who wanted to take a shot at him from different, positions. And he was the best offensive lineman there, maybe the best player there. And so I have less concerns there. I do obviously want to see him in pads, but let's face it, guys, like the bar for what he has to cross is Laken Tomlinson from last year. And while I think Laken Tomlinson was a better player than most Seahawks fans would want to admit, he was a challenge as a pass protector. And so I think Gray Zabel is going to show up on day one, be a better pass protector, probably a much better pass protector than Laken Tomlinson. I'm actually really interested to see how he looks as a run blocker, because that's not something that you could see as much at the Senior Bowl, at least in drills. And that's going to be something we're going to learn probably not until preseason games to really know if he can move people off the spot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hey, Brian, moving on to, our head coach, Mike Macdonald, year two, sort of, a full off season work with John, and, bringing in certain guys that he wants, and, not the way it was last year, being rushed. And also, pretty much the end of the Pete era. Like I think everybody is out the door from the Pete era. In the biggest notables, obviously Gino, DK, and Tyler. And that so now it feels like a new era. They talk about everybody was at OTAs and everybody's out and this buy-in and I know that's easy to say early before anything starts. But so far there was times when all 90 guys were there. So, what do you see Mike Macdonald, like the vibe so far this year? Is he building this tough, connected team? And some of the players that maybe they brought in sort of that reflect that. But how do you see Mike sort of year 2 here?
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head. I think DK Metcalf was a guy that was not fully committed to the direction this team was going. And he was one of the most talented players on the team, one of the highest paid players on the team. And that's tough as a coach or just as a leader in general to have that dynamic, even if I wouldn't classify DK Metcalf as like a malcontent or that he was like, sowing seeds of doubt with the team, but just by not being all the way in, that has an effect. That just does. And Geno Smith, this was a guy who wanted to sign an extension going into camp last year. The Seahawks weren't open to doing that. And clearly he had decided at some point that he didn't really want to come back. So I do feel like, and then add to that, Ryan Grubb was a guy that Mike Macdonald, I wouldn't say he had to hire, but he didn't have a lot of options of who to hire at the point that he himself was hired. He's one of the last coaches to get the job, to get a head coach job last year. And I don't think that was a great marriage. Obviously, that's not breaking any news because Ryan Grubb's gone after 1 year. So I think you feel that difference. I think Clint Kubiak is cut from the same cloth as Mike Macdonald. I think the offense that he runs is the identity that Mike Macdonald wants his team to have. And I think one of the things that has struck me is that Mike Macdonald is not the most touchy-feely guy. He's very authentic. He's not like gruff, but he's not going to be the guy that's rah-rah. And, for him last year, the big team outings were to like military installations and visiting troops, which is cool and inspirational, but it's not necessarily fun. And for them to go to T-Mobile Park and take batting practice and shag balls, to them go see the Mission Impossible premiere, like these might seem like really like irrelevant things. To me, it signals a little bit of a recognition that he wants to create more than just a militaristic environment. He wants to create a place that people want to work and want to come. And then you had everyone show up to OTAs and mini camps, that's pretty rare. Even for like the LOB era teams, like it's just rare. So I think that's all good news. And Leonard Williams talked about that toward the end of mini camp. And I think the players feel it. I think, I don't think that wins you, a ton of games, but I certainly think it helps. So we'll see just how good they are to go along with that connectivity, in the coming months.
So I kind of got an interesting question for you, Brian, with just your, ability to be at minicamp and stuff. The one thing that was talked about kind of in the off season a little bit, even through last year with Mike Macdonald, was how much time he wasn't spending with the offensive staff and with the offense. Has that changed this year? Is he more involved of at least just being around the offense during practices and stuff than he was last year? Because we know last year he was really building that defense and getting everyone on the same page. But then there was something he kind of, I think, missed, was that as a head coach, you got to be able to keep both pots going warm instead of just focusing on the one. Has that changed at all this year?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bryce. I asked Mike Macdonald about how he determines where he spends his time and how much it's changed from last year. And he kind of he punted the question about how it's changed from last year. But I can tell you, when I was asking him questions last year about the offense, he was, especially in training camp, he's like, well, that's not my area. I don't spend as much time there. He was pretty hands off. And this year, his answer to the question of like, how do you decide where you spend your time? He went into a lot of detail about the fact that he kind of starts with the offense and that he's handed off some of the practice, quote, play calling duties on the defensive side to Aden Dirty, which gives him more time to spend with the offense and some of the other places on the team. So I do think he is dedicating more of his energy to that side of the ball than he did last year. Whether or not that's going to, play out and be a good thing, well, I guess we'll have to wait on that. But this is a guy that, I had Ted Wynn from The Athletic on my show early last year when Mike Macdonald got hired, and he had written a really good article about Mike Macdonald's teaching and the way he does his defense. And that it wasn't just the fact that he built a great defensive scheme or that he's a great defensive play caller. What stood out to Ted and to others is that Mike Macdonald had built a system for learning his defense that really allowed anyone to understand how to do that. And Ted kind of posited this question of like, I wonder if he's going to figure out how to apply that to offense. And last year, I think the answer is definitely no. I don't think that's where he's spending his time. I am curious, like taking Mike Macdonald's very sharp mind and applying it to offense, if he's going to start to develop some of those kind of innovative methods that could help the team grow faster than maybe it would otherwise.
When you look at Mike now in year 2, in your eyes, what does he have to do to prove that he's the guy in Seattle as the head coach?
Yeah, it's I think it's pretty clear that there's 2 things that he has to do. One is win. Like winning is always like, it's a results-based deal. And so you just have to win and ideally, make the playoffs, win playoff games, all that kind of stuff. But I think the other thing that's a little bit ahead of, playoffs and end of season is, can he be a complete coach? Can he work with an offense? Does he have an offensive philosophy? Can he create a cohesive whole? And, last year the answer was no. I think there's really good reasons about why it was a no last year. So you give him a little bit of a pass, but he got to interview anyone he wanted. He took his time. He picked Clint Kubiak. They brought in this coaching staff. If this looks like a DOA situation again on offense, then you're going to hear people say, okay, maybe this is a Brandon Staley-like hire, or, early years of Bill Belichick or early years of Pete Carroll, where they were really a one side of the ball coach and hadn't yet figured out how to coach a complete team. So I think that's the thing that's going to really be a key thing to watch going into this season.
So, Brian, how versatile do you think this defense can be now? Obviously, they added Nick Emmanwori to this group, but, you're returning essentially 11 starters again. Like, there's no real changeover from that defense. How much more do you think they can be versatile, learning this defense? Obviously, Mike Macdonald can probably add more into it, because we heard the points last year where they kind of had to go back at the midway point when they made the linebacker switches and kind of go back to basics. Does this defense even seem to be moving faster in minicamp and just what they're able to do?
Yeah, I mean, those are 2 good questions. I think they're definitely they feel like they are in year 2 of this defense. There's a lot of fluidity to how they're playing out there. The coverage has been really great. The secondary is talking constantly in between plays, during plays, after plays, and I think that's been really good. Again, it's a little hard to tell the trenches until the pads come on. But I think we know what Leonard Williams and Jaron Reed are. I think Byron Murphy is a guy that has a chance to really take a big step forward. I was on my show this morning. I was talking about that. I don't think people realize that he ranked in the top, I think 7 in the NFL among defensive interior players in pass rush win rate when it was a true pass set situation. So when that the offense is going to be passing and you're giving that guy a chance to rush the passer, he had a 20.5% win rate, which, was ahead of like DeForest Buckner. So I think this is a guy that could be a really big difference maker. And then you talk about the versatility. Well, Julian Love, cornerback, slot corner, safety. Kobe Bryant, outside corner, slot corner, safety. And then Nick Emmanwori started as a cornerback, moved to safety, and has been used primarily as a nickel corner during camp. So you've got 3 guys right there that can be used in many different ways, in the box, at the back end, maybe even on the boundary if necessary. And I think that gives Mike Macdonald a lot of opportunity to disguise coverages, not to mention Devin Witherspoon, nickel corner, outside corner, can play a lot there. So Nicky Minori, I think, is closer to a nickel / linebacker than he is a nickel / safety, at least so far. And one of the things that got really exciting to see toward the end of minicamp was his speed on blitzes. This is a guy that when he's coming from the second level, I think is going to cause problems for teams. I think he is super fast. He's super strong. And I think he's got some good instincts. So that's going to be an interesting one to watch for sure.
What's your what have you seen out of Riq, and what's your confidence level with him? Talking about the players we mentioned, the versatility, but how do you see him fitting in? Obviously, a big year for him, contract year. What's your confidence level with him overall so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Riq Woolen takes a lot of heat from Seahawks fans, and I'm not sure it's all deserved. That said, he has been he's been benched by 2 different coaches in 2 different seasons, and that's not good. So I think you have to acknowledge that. But this is a guy that, I think people would want to say, hey, he's not really putting in the work, or maybe he's not detail oriented. This is a guy that he was at every OTA, like before the press was there and during press. Like, he didn't have to be, but he was. And he and Devin Witherspoon have a really tight bond. Riq Woolen put on muscle last year. He talked about it. It was a big part of him staying healthier last year. And also, one of the least told stories of last season was Riq Woolen's improvement as a run defender. He was a significantly better run defender last year than he'd ever been in his career, and it's something that he worked on. Now, he also has maddening moments in coverage where you're like, how can you not be making this play? How are you getting beaten in this big moment? And the question that I think coaches and the front office will have for him, and honestly, everybody that evaluates him will have for him, is can you be the guy that's making the play in the biggest moments as opposed to the guy who's having the big play made on you in those big moments? And that just happened too many times last year. So I think the guy is incredibly talented. He's an amazing athlete. He's now in year 4, and there's no more time to say, well, he needs a little bit more seasoning. Like, I do think people forget this guy played receiver for most of his career before switching to corner late. And he's been learning on the job and doing pretty darn well while doing that. But it's time. It's time for him to take that next step. And if he doesn't, then, you might be in a situation where the Seahawks don't re-sign him. And if that's the case, like, they just do not have an answer behind Riq Woolen that I think is anywhere close to as talented as he is as a cornerback.
So, Brian, the last question I'll ask you about the defense here is what part of this defense worries you a bit? Depth at a certain position? Like, is there a spot? Because everyone wants to talk about how good it's going to be because everyone's returning and all the talent. But as we know, it's not necessarily a flawless defense yet. So what area for you would you say is your biggest area of concern?
Yeah, I think the Seahawks, for as much improvement as they made last year, they still didn't. They had times where they struggled to defend the run. Like, they had all the personnel changes done. They had weeks behind them of playing really good defense when the Packers came to town, and Josh Jacobs ran it down their throats in the first half and basically ended that game before it really got started. That can't happen. Like, this team is not talented enough overall that their defense can just be dominated, whether it's by ground or by air, and expect the offense to come back and carry them. I just don't think that's how this team's built. So they have to be better on the ground in defending the run. And part of the question there from a personnel standpoint is, I don't know that they really wanted to bring Jonathan Hankins back this year. I don't know that he's, that they're upset to have him. Obviously, they love him in that locker room, and Adam Dirty has history with him, but this was a really deep and talented nose tackle class in the draft. And I'd asked Mike Macdonald whether they didn't see it that way or whether it just didn't fall right to them. And he said it just didn't fall that way, and the indication was they wanted to take somebody and they weren't able to do it. So, Brandon Peely is a guy that is interesting. I asked Leonard Williams about him at the end of minicamp, and he said that Brandon Peely was, according to the team, the guy that added the most weight from a body composition. I'm sorry, the most muscle from a body composition standpoint since OTA started. And he's an interesting player. So he's a guy to watch. I think that they would like to have a younger nose tackle step forward, and I think they'd like to have somebody that can take some of the snaps so that Byron Murphy can play more 3-tech. But, that's a position that gives me a little bit of concern. The other one that I think people will point to is Josh Jobe as the other corner. Keep in mind, he's only in there when they play nickel with Devin Witherspoon as the nickel, as opposed to their kind of 3 safety look where Nicky Minwari is playing nickel. Josh Jobe's looked excellent during camp. I think the depth behind him is a question mark. I think there's some of the guys there that looked decent during camp. Not the guys that probably people know of, but like Shamar Jean-Charles looked pretty good. I thought that who was the other guy? Demarion Williams had a couple nice plays during camp, but like Nehemiah Pritchett to me is a guy who I still don't see it. I don't see it. And, I hope for his sake and for the team's sake that he really comes on, but I still think the team is likely to look to add a veteran corner. And I think they're just waiting for someone who will agree to the price that they want to pay.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, real quick, before we get into a bit of the quarterback room and quarterback talk, I know you talked about the receivers being maybe a concern on this offense, but what excites you about this new offense that you've seen so far?
Yeah, I think the thing it won't be the same for everybody, but if you're a fan that loves physical football, this team is going to make or break themselves every week by how they run the ball. It's not going to be a question anymore. It won't be the last 3 seasons where it's like it's 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1, and really you're taking a sack because you decided to call a pass on that play. Like, what are we doing here? It's going to be a team that pounds the rock on a regular basis, that sets the tone based on how they're running the ball, and everything else is going to come off of that. And so that's certainly different. It reminds me a little bit of what Mike Holmgren ran when he was here. A lot of runs and then play action off of those runs, boots off of those runs. And if they can be effective running the football, then I think they have the tight ends and some of the receivers to be an effective offense. And I think that they also have the potential, I'm sure we'll talk about this in a little bit, to have some interesting wrinkles in terms of who they use and when they use them. I think AJ Barner's an ascending player. I think Elijah Arroyo has a chance of being an impact player. And I actually like some of the other, younger tight ends on this roster as well. So we'll see how Torrey Horton looks. He hasn't been on the field, but there's a lot of questions. And then I'll just say this, seeing a fullback back in the backfield for me is great. I love seeing that style of football. I love seeing the I formation. It's been a minute. And I love seeing Robbie Oots, a certified member of the quad squad out there just laying wood. And you put the pads on, I think this is going to look like a very different team than the offense that you've seen the last few years.
So being at minicamp, Brian, and rookie minicamp, and seeing Clint Kubiak and John Benton and this staff really that's come into place here, and what have you noticed that's different in the way they teach the offense as coaches to these players compared to maybe what you saw last year with Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff and that group? Is there a vast difference? Is it similar? How's that all look to you?
Yeah, it's I can't say for sure where the differences are because I'm not hearing every word that they're saying, but I can tell you this, like Andrew Janoko, the quarterback's coach, it feels to me very different than last year. Like the amount of work he's doing with the quarterbacks, the energy he has, the time he's spending with them feels really productive. And I think there was some evidence of that being productive over the course of minicamp. And then John Benton, they've got John Benton and Rick Dennison and Justin Out, and they've got a whole crew there working with the offensive line. And I think that's allowed them to do some interesting kind of micro coaching, or at least, change the ratio. Anyone that knows about education, like ratio of teacher to student is a big deal, right? And so they have a better ratio now. And so you'll see in the drills, they will split up the left side of the offensive line from the right side of the offensive line. And they'll have one guy, like one group working with one guy and another group working with another guy. And so you've got the right tackle, the right guard, and one of the centers going with one group, and then the left tackle, the left guard, and another center going over there. That was not the way things were working last year. And I think that's got some potential. And John Benton is very hands-on. I mean, this is a guy been doing this for many, many years. He knows exactly what he wants. And I think I shared a video of him in rookie minicamp, literally, tracing his feet one after the other to measure exactly how far he wanted the offensive lineman splits to be, how far apart they want that, and like they're going over very specific, this step to this step to this step. You should be at this landmark by this point doing this thing. So I feel like there's a lot of detail going on in how they're coaching. And, my craziest take probably is I think the offensive line might be good. I'm not even saying it might not be terrible. I think it might be good. That's my early, no pads, lots to prove. But I like what I see from that group.
So I have a follow-up for you on this, because there was a carryover or two carryovers from last year's offensive staff, one of them being Jake Peetz. And, there was all that kind of question about what was going on with Jake Peetz when the offensive staff was dismissed basically from Seattle with Ryan Grubb. So what is Jake Peetz like still kind of in the same role? Like, I know it's rookie minicamp, you may not know, but just from your perspective, like where has he mainly been out there with the coaches and the players?
Yeah, he's still out there, involved, and he and Cooper Kupp have a lot of past history together, and he's definitely doing his thing. I haven't had a chance to talk to him yet to really hear from him, like how and what, if any, his role has changed relative to what it was last year. But this is a guy that if Clint Kubiak didn't want him around, he wouldn't be here. So, they've come up a little bit together. Obviously some different parts of that McVay, Shanahan, Kubiak tree, but I think Jake Peetz brings a really good perspective from a different branch of that tree, especially on the passing game. And I would bet that he is, collaborating with Clint Kubiak, because one of the things we heard from Cooper Kupp was that what stood out to him is that Clint Kubiak doesn't think he has all the answers and takes input from players. If he's doing that, you have to think he's also taking input from coaches. So I think that would be my expectation of how he's kind of fitting in so far this year.
Yeah. So moving over to the QB room specifically, obviously all eyes this year are going to be on our new quarterback, Sam Darnold. There was a split with the fan base, it seemed, the last couple of years with Geno Smith. Now here comes, we bring in Sam, we get younger. We also draft Jalen Milroe, and we bring back a familiar face in Drew Lock. How is Sam looking to you so far? Are there any concerns? I know it's just mini camp, but are there any concerns out there with him, or is it just one of those things where let's give it some time and get to camp and figure it out then?
Yeah, I'll give you all the caveats, even though most people will just ignore this part and just pay attention to what I say next. I'll just say, like, the offense is going to be behind the defense. It's year one for the offense. New coaches, new players. The players haven't played together. They haven't played for these coaches. This scheme as well is new for them. So you got a new offensive line, new run system. Like, everything is new pretty much. And the reality is it's going to take some time for that to all settle. You're also getting, a defense that's in year two for one of, if not the best defensive minds in football. That's very talented, and they're playing at a high level early on because they're that much further ahead. So all of those things factor into, I would say they're in the install phase of the offense. So they're literally just like, okay, here's how to run this play. Did we actually run it right? Whether or not they did it well is another thing, but just did everyone go where they're supposed to go? So all those things, that's kind of the stage that we're at. All those caveats stated, Sam Darnold was not super impressive during camp. Like, he just wasn't. He wasn't terrible. He wasn't like, oh my God. Like, at this point last year and into training camp, Sam Howell was like, oh wow, this is really not going to work. Like, he was really, really, really struggling. And that was kind of the conversation on the sidelines with the press. I was like, God, like, he is bad. And I don't even know that Sam Howell's that bad, but he was playing that poorly, at least during that camp. It's not like that, but I can't say like Sam Darnold has really clearly demonstrated this strength where he's doing this really well, or he makes this throw, repeatedly well, or, I could see this clear progression in terms of how he's playing, and he's great in the red zone, or he's great in like, I don't have that yet for Sam Darnold. The things that have stuck out to me more have been, there's been some judgment stuff still, like where he's choosing to deliver the ball, when he's choosing to deliver it. He's thrown a handful of interceptions. He should have thrown a number more because Riq Woolen or Devin Witherspoon dropped some interceptions. I just don't know. That's where it's like, is that because he's still learning the system and learning the players and he'll make better decisions along the way? You hope. You also look at his history, and the guy has a pretty high turnover worthy play rate over his career. So, at this point, I think it's fair to at least have a little bit of concern that, okay, he does not have a Justin Jefferson on this team who can beat any player in any coverage, and he doesn't have a Kevin O'Connell who knows how to scheme everything perfectly to get those guys open. That said, I don't think this is like a red alert. Things are absolutely a disaster, but it's a yellow flag right now. He did not come out looking like, man, I don't know why people said that he couldn't repeat what he did last year when he was an MVP candidate. He's definitely like that guy now. I left thinking like, he's not quite there yet. There's some work to do.
So looking at the room as like a whole, Brian, you've obviously got Drew Lock back now, and you've got this kind of cool, unique specialty piece currently in Jalen Milroe. How do you see that dynamic working? Because we know that if Milroe goes into the preseason, lights it up, everyone's going to be saying, oh, he should be QB2, and Drew Lock, we can cut him, we're fine. I'm of the thought, like, let Jalen Milroe sit and develop. There are a lot of things in his game from Alabama that concern me with just he needs more time as a passer to develop. But with that said, you look at the athleticism. He is an amazing athlete. How do you think the lower part of this QB room works out through training camp and through the preseason?
It's going to be fascinating. I think Jalen Milroe could not have wound up in a better spot in a lot of ways, because there is an established starter. Sam Darnold is going to be the starter. Drew Lock has been playing really well during mini camps, during OTAs and mini camp. And the team knows him, and he's comfortable in this area. He's been here before. So that's all great. There's really no expectation that Jalen Milroe needs to even be the backup in year one. And the thing with Jalen Milroe is there's nobody out there that is telling you, yeah, there's a question about whether he's a good enough athlete to play in the NFL. Like, that's not a question. Nobody's questioning whether he's a worker or has great work ethic or is a good teammate. Like, nobody's questioning that. So now you're really narrowing down this question to, can he be an NFL passer? Does he have the capability? He's got the arm. We know that. And I would say that I saw further evidence during camp that he has some throws that are consistently good for him. He's great in the seam, like throwing the seams. Middle of the field seems to be a strength, and then he's got a good deep ball. I think I would narrow it down to, he's got to work on his progressions. He's got to work on his judgment and decision making about when to deliver the ball and to whom. But those feel like manageable pieces to work on. And his mechanics were noticeably better as camp went on. The accuracy of his passes improved. Mike Macdonald talked about it, joking about it with him, and like the difference, even throwing against air, how different he looks than 2 months ago. So I think all that's really positive. I think it would be a shame if there started to be pressure where he would, get snaps like in any meaningful way. If he's going to be used as a specialty player, I think that's great. I think has the potential to be a difference-making addition to this team in red zone and third downs, the short yardage, all that kind of stuff. But give this guy the time he needs to develop, and I think you're going to have a much, much, much more valuable player than if you rush him onto the field too soon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what our thoughts are. We just love the situation for him that, he could just really sit back and develop, and then when the time's right, it's right. And that's what excites us about this pick. But looking ahead to training camp, what battles are you looking forward to going into camp here?
Yeah, I mean, offensive line is the obvious, right? Like I want to see them with pads. I want to see how they hold up, in pass rush drills. I want to see how they move. I'm interested in the running back position, to be honest. I think it's one that is among the deepest on this roster. Kenneth Walker, everyone's like, there's this weird thing, guys, where people are like, oh, if someone's injured, all of a sudden I'm just gonna, not like this player. I just never got it. All the way back to CJ Procise. Like, CJ Procise was a great player, and if he could have been healthy, it would have been a good thing. I don't see I don't think CJ Procise wanted to be injured. He just did. He got injured. So I know Kenneth Walker's got some stuff to prove there, but this guy is just ultra talented. I'm eager to see what he looks like in this offense. I'm not sure that we'll get to see much of that until, the regular season. That, you don't usually see your starting backs getting many carries during preseason games even. So, but beyond him, Zach Charbonnet's looked really good. Kenny McIntosh looks like a really good fit for this offense. And then Damian Martinez is a really talented pick that they got in the 7th round. That doesn't even bring up George Halani, or I'll even mention Jacardia Wright. Jacardia Wright had a kind of jaw-dropping jump cut toward the end of the last minicamp practice where I was like, all right, you got to take him seriously too. So I think that room, how that shakes out, is going to be fascinating. And that goes all the way into the fullback room because Robbie Utes and Brady Russell are both, I think, really talented, quality players, quality guys. How that shakes out with the tight end situation, like Brady Russell was a tight end, now he's a fullback. Does Noah Fant get traded? Is that something that happens that maybe allows Brady Russell to sneak onto this roster as a tight end? Or are they going to have to cut one of Robbie Utes or Brady Russell? That would be a tough cut. So, yeah, I mean, even the back end of the tight end room, Eric Saubert is a blocking tight end that they've signed and has experience in this system. I want to see Nick Callerup. No one's going to talk about him, but this is an undrafted free agent from Minnesota. The guy looks the part. I'm eager to see what he looks like with pads. I think the team is as well. And he's a guy that could sneakily steal that spot from Eric Saubert, who's, a vet on a pretty light deal. So, I mean, a lot of it's on the offensive side. Defensively, I think things are more set, but those are the places I'll probably be looking the most at.
So, Brian, how do you expect Mike Macdonald to handle these competitions? Will it be quick decisions because he wants to unify this team, like maybe especially on the offensive side? Or do you think, as he, as he's kind of hinted, or do you think he'll let them play out a little bit and get deeper into the preseason? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I asked the coach that exact question in this last press conference because the way I put it to him was like, you guys rotated your guard position all the way into the season. And when we asked you about it last year, you were pretty clear that that was not ideal. You wish that wasn't the case. And you wish someone had really just, taken the spot. So when are you hoping to kind of nail down that group this year? And he said a couple of weeks, like I think 2 weeks into camp. And if that's the case, like that's pretty quick. And I think it's really important because for as much as talent and coaching and scheme and play calling and all those things go into an offensive line functioning well, continuity is a pretty big deal. Communication's a pretty big deal. And you need the same guy next to each other, the same guys next to each other as much as possible. So I think if he's thinking about that for the offensive line, where they probably have the most questions about how things are going to shake out, I would assume that's probably roughly the timeline for a lot of these battles that they'll want to start to nail down. I wouldn't be surprised if the fullback battle is the last one standing. That one's going to be an interesting one to watch.
Awesome stuff. Brian, awesome conversation. We appreciate you hanging out with us. Time flew here, but yeah, great stuff. Appreciate it again. But before we let you go, why don't you let everybody know what you have coming up next, and also your channel and where everybody can find all your stuff.
Yeah, this has been great. Fun to chop it up with you guys. So anywhere you get your content, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, all those places, just look up Hawkblogger and you'll find me there. Hawkblogger.com is the blog.
Guys, that was Brian Nemhauser from Hawkblogger. Man, great conversation. Brian was down at minicamp, just, getting boots on the ground, seeing guys that, a lot of fans haven't even really maybe heard of, even talking about those camp battles. Man, he brought up the running back room near the end, something you and I have talked about that could be exciting because of how deep that room is with, obviously he starts with Ken Walker, but then Zach's looking good. And, he mentioned even Kenny Mack could fit in this system. People were like, well, is Kenny Mack going to make it? And then Damian Martinez with a bruiser back that, people can get excited about, right? Because, we all loved when we had a guy like Chris Carson in this building. So, awesome take. And especially when he's talking camp battles, the offensive line, obviously a focus, but his hot take, this O-line could be good.
Yeah, no, that was really interesting when Brian said that, because I watch Brian's show almost daily, and that's one thing for me that was kind of my big takeaway, was the fact that he said this O-line could be good, and yes, pads aren't on yet and all of that, but that was another thing. And same thing with the Anthony Bradford. Like, a lot of us had written Anthony Bradford off, me being one of those individuals. And you know what? I'm going to be interested because Brian's there. He's seeing it. So if Brian's saying, hey, like, keep an eye out on an Anthony Bradford, then I'm going to pay attention closely to that, position battle with him and Christian Haynes. It's going to be really interesting to see how this O-line shapes up, because I really think outside of the two anchors there in Charles Cross and Abe Lucas, and Gray Zabel now, realistically, as left guard, that right guard and center spot is going to be an interesting battle all through camp on who ends up where, and how that unit gels together.
Yeah, and the other thing is, he mentioned just the new staff in here working with the offensive line with decades of experience, and just the things he noted, like the attention to detail, like you got to be placed here at this point doing this. That's attention to detail. And to talk about the marriage with Grubb obviously wasn't a good one because he was out the door right away during the offseason. But then to bring in his guys, Kubiak, and then the offensive line coaches with all this experience, that gives you even more confidence. Obviously a healthy Lucas and then Gray Zabel, but then just with that staff behind it gives you confidence. I think gives Brian confidence that, hey, this thing could be okay.
Yeah, no, and I truly believe, like, just the way he was even describing the drills that John Benton's running, and splitting the guys into two groups, not trying to coach the whole group, and then at the same time marking out the steps and the feet and everything on how these guys have to work. That's huge. That's different. That's attention to detail. And I think the one thing we might be able to say about this Seahawks team is they, especially on the O-line, they're going to be good at the fundamentals, which is something I think's been missing from this unit, is being good. They've tried to basically run before they could walk, and I think that's something that got them in trouble last year. The one thing for me, though, that was interesting about that Brian said too was the yellow flag on Sam Darnold so far. That's something that hopefully by the time, with this time off, Sam's able to get, some workouts in with the receivers and really build some more chemistry with them. Because again, this is all new for all of them. Kupp being here, Sam Darnold being here. It's a whole new kind of offense, working with an offensive coordinator that's new. So hopefully come training camp, Sam's a little bit sharper. But again, I agree with Brian on the other point. I think this is a perfect spot for Jalen Milroe, and he's already seeing improvements himself. Mike Macdonald noted it. If we let this kid develop properly, and yes, use his athletic ability for advantages that we can, but let him develop as a passer, we may have, a potential franchise type quarterback on our hands here in Seattle if we don't rush it and we don't panic about it.
Yeah, no, I agreed. I mean, we've talked about that, and then one final takeaway is that when he talked about the receiver room, that is going to be something to keep an eye on, especially with the departure of DK Metcalf. I know there was again a split camps of fans like, oh, we'll be fine without him, or get him out of here, and then sometimes and I know it seemed like he wasn't bought all in, and then how it all worked out that he sort of kind of didn't want to be here at the end anyways. But if you look at it, it's going to be my focus is going to be, can Jackson Smith and Jigba now be that true number one guy? Because it's easier said than done when even if DK is missing a couple games, hey, I got to step up for a bit, but now you're truly the guy. I don't care what the offensive scheme is. There's a number one guy in every room, and he's it. So can he take those reins? That's going to be interesting to find out this season.
No, it really is. And so, you know what? I'm looking forward to it. It's great to have Brian on and talk this because he's boots on the ground, and it's going to be really exciting to talk to our next guest on our next show, which will be Greg Bell. Yeah.
Guys, even though we're in a slow period, we keep bringing it to you guys. Brian was awesome today on the show. Again, make sure you go down if you haven't already, go down, subscribe to his channel because he's always bringing good stuff and great guests as well. Just like we're doing, man, because like Bryce just mentioned, Greg Bell coming up next as well. Another guy in the building down there. So we're going to get Greg's insight coming up. That's coming up in a few days. So guys, make sure, again, you subscribe to the channel, like and share the videos. And also, we're part of fieldgoals.com as well. So go over to the website too and check out all that. So, and check out the store, guys. Back up and running. So get yourself some merch. There's going to be some new stuff dropping as well. So head on over there. Bryce, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
No, honestly, you know what? Like you said, Ryan, it's a bit of a dead period here, but we're going to keep bringing the content as much as we can to you guys to make sure you're not losing anything on your Seahawks. And yeah, man, I can't wait for training camp. It's going to be exciting this year to see how these battles all shape up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can't wait either. So guys, that's it for us tonight. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.